As Scott said, I'm Laura. I am a teacher at a special needs school. I've worked in special needs education for 20 years now. I've worked everything from a teaching assistant up to head teacher. So today we're going to be just talking about learning difficulties, looking at some specific learning difficulties and really thinking about strategies that you can use in your sessions to support those young people who might have any additional needs. First of all, I want to just make you aware that I've never done a Zoom training before. I train lots of people, but usually face to face. So hopefully I do okay, and especially as it's all being recorded. So the aims of tonight's sessions are to learn just a little bit more about learning difficulties, to learn some strategies to support young people with potentially learning difficulties or disabilities, and to increase your confidence in working with young people with learning difficulties. Now, my presentation's pretty dry. It's mostly to support me to make sure I say the right things. So don't worry about reading every slide. I just want to start off by saying, in the world of special needs, we use a heck of a lot of acronyms, and I'm really sorry if during this session I use them. Do ask me what I mean. You know, when I was putting together this presentation, I came across acronyms I didn't know. In my special school that I work in, which is a staff team of all specialist staff, we have a glossary up in the staff room to make sure that we all know what every acronym means, because a lot of them have got dual meanings. They seem to change. So I guess the key thing is, if you hear something you don't understand, just ask in this presentation or people you're with. So I'm going to start off with just learning difficulties in general. There are 4 types. There's mild learning difficulties, moderate, severe, and profound and multiple. The ones that you're most likely to come across are mild and moderate. Those young people take a little bit longer to learn new information and skills. They are likely to attend a mainstream school, may present as, you know, your average young person, and they have got great potential to live independently as an adult and access work. 10% of the population have some kind of disability, hidden disability or additional learning need or communication need. And yet only a very small percentage, it's around 1% of our young people, will access a special school. So the majority of them are in our mainstream schools, accessing mainstream activities in the evenings, so are highly likely to be accessing your clubs. And as Scott mentioned before, we might not necessarily recognise or know that they have learning difficulties. There are some obvious ones where you might be able to see that they've got some additional needs, but there are some that you can not notice and actually you could recognise as something completely different, such as if you've got somebody who's being disruptive, you might not necessarily initially feel that that is due to their learning difficulties. So there are also severe and profound and multiple learning difficulties. Those young people are most likely to be accessing our special schools. They will take longer to learn new skills. It's unlikely that you would have these young people accessing your clubs without you knowing it. For young people with severe learning difficulties, they're likely to have additional communication needs. It might be that they struggle with verbal communication, and they need a lot of additional support. That's not to say that they're not accessing your TIB groups. I worked with some young people with severe learning difficulties the best part of a decade ago, and I had 2 or 3 of them accessing their local running club, where actually the access to this running club had such a profound impact on them, and the group were very inclusive in supporting them, and they were running 10Ks in 41 minutes, so we're actually very, very strong members of the team. Then profound and multiple learning difficulties, you would definitely know if you met someone with profound and multiple learning difficulties. They're likely to have very limited verbal communication, potentially use a wheelchair, and have very complex needs. So I just wanted to make sure I gave you a bit of information about all the kind of types, especially those ones that you hear about a lot before we moved on. So PMLD stands for profound and multiple learning difficulties. You will hear for mild learning difficulties and moderate learning difficulties, they're referred to as MLD quite a lot. And just to make things harder, they both begin with M. So the moderate learning difficulties comes into both. Okay, so just thinking about strategies that we can use to support. What's really fortunate is actually every kind of learning difficulty, disability I'm going to be talking about this evening, the same strategies work to support those young people. So I've been trying to put this in context of a sports session, which is quite a challenge because I am not a sports coach. So thinking about how you can repeat drills or games multiple weeks in a row so that young people get a chance to learn a skill, learn a game or a drill, and then the next week are able to master it. Using reduced language. So I'm a terrible example of this at the moment. I am rambling and talking very fast. So reduced language would be to use very concise factual language. We are going to go over all these at the end. Make sure you use lots of demonstrations. Use gestures, props. So if you're talking about throwing an orange ball, you're holding an orange ball. Allow processing time. So give them a little bit of time after you say something to think it through. And then potentially you can ask them to repeat back the instructions. So something I always found really helpful in my kind of primary school PE lessons was considering how you split up into groups. Are you splitting up into mixed ability groups? There are sometimes occasions when that is great to have your best player with your player who might be struggling a bit, and getting them to do peer-to-peer sport. Or sometimes, you know, it is necessary to have more kind of streamed groups, so groups where you've got your best players together and your ones who are still developing together. And consider where you put support. I'm not sure in your sessions whether you would have a coach and someone supporting. I know that we used to quite often have youth volunteers at sessions, so whether there'd be someone to go and support the group where you might have somebody with learning difficulties or any additional needs. Okay.
Can I just jump in, Laura? If anybody's got any questions as Laura's going on, just shout. We want this session to be informal and interactive. There is time at the end for questions, but if there's anything that occurs, just shout.
Yeah, please do. This is going to be really brief because you don't need to know really what causes a learning disability, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of information. So people can be born with a learning disability and it will be something to do with their brain development. And this can be from adverse, something to do with pregnancy, or it can be something to do with birth. It can be something inherited. It might come from illness after birth. Sometimes it can be from an injury, and sometimes we just don't know where it comes from. It is just something that happens. Cool. I got halfway through spelling dyscalculia and stopped. So we're going to talk about some specific types of learning difficulties. When I was talking about moderate learning difficulties, this would impact every area of a young person's life. In the moderate, mild and severe learning difficulties. However, there are some specific learning difficulties that wouldn't impact every area of your life, and you would be able to have dyslexia, dyspraxia, and it was supposed to say dyscalculia, but I obviously got halfway and forgot how to spell the rest.
I was going to say dyslexia came into it and you couldn't spell it.
Yes, absolutely. Spelled it wrong about 7 times and then gave up. So dyslexia, all of these would just impact the learning and development in one specific area, not necessarily the whole of somebody's life. And again, we've got 10% of our population who will have additional needs. It's highly likely that we all know somebody. We might have members of our family, we might have worked with somebody, we might have friends who have some kind of learning difficulty, learning need, communication, additional communication need.
So just to say that I am one of them. So I'm dyslexic. So you know, one of my issues is auditory sequencing problems. So if you gave me a whole batch of instructions to do with cricket, I wouldn't be able to retain the all of those instructions, because that's not how my brain works. So I need it chunked up into much smaller chunks.
Yeah. Thanks, Julie. Right, I just liked the way this looked. So dyslexia, I wanted to think about how it would impact all different areas of your life. And as Julie said, that issues with sequencing comes in. This is mostly to do with learning. But there's, you know, it's to do with sequencing. As Julie said, that auditory sequencing is really tricky for young people with dyslexia. They need it broken down into small steps and then an opportunity to demonstrate what they've started to sequence. So just thinking a little bit about what dyslexia is, and I'm sorry this is a little bit cheesy, but every time I went online and wanted to find a very clear definition, it just brought me up pictures of celebrities with dyslexia. So we've got 4 here, and it just demonstrates it doesn't impact to have a good life. So it is a specific learning difficulty, and it might affect reading and writing skills, but primarily when we're thinking about the cricket sessions, it's likely to affect short-term and working memory, processing skills, maybe concentration and attention, and a capacity to organize themselves. So what we really think about is actually this is, in these sports sessions, are our young people with dyslexia and potentially moderate and mild learning difficulties opportunity to shine. Is the time when actually they're on a level peg with their peers. They don't have the reading and writing barriers in front of them that they would in school sessions potentially. And we see lots of sports stars who have got dyslexia. When I was googling cricket ones, none of the cricket players I'd ever heard of had dyslexia, but my cricket knowledge is very limited. Ian Botham, I think, is my only cricket player I know. So dyslexia, it can stand on its own, and it can overlap with a range of learning difficulties. So it can overlap with ASD, so autism, dyspraxia, ADHD, another acronym, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, some specific language difficulties, dyscalculia, which is numbers basically. So with dyslexia, it's primarily letters. When we're looking at challenges within learning, whereas dyscalculia is numbers. And then processing disorders, so sensory processing disorders. Okay. So dyspraxia, which, just to make things tricky, they gave a very similar name to, is a challenge with fine motor skills and organisation. again, there's no need to know exactly what all these things mean. I think probably I'd been working in special needs education before I had very clear definitions of what dyslexia and dyspraxia was. I'd been working there for many years before that. So I just want to think that dyspraxia, what we can actually do if we get told somebody is dyspraxic, how we can support them. So it might be difficult for them to follow instructions. So how can we support someone who finds it difficult to respond to instructions? Well, we can break down those spoken instructions, put them into short sentences, give a little bit of the instruction, then demonstrate, get them to do it, and then do the next instruction. So for example, if your first instruction is split into teams, say split into teams, break them up into teams, and then give the next set of instructions. If the next set of instruction is putting the equipment out, if it's get a red cone, get a green cone, put one at each end, that's your next instruction. Then you can give the information about the activity. Okay, speak slowly and clearly. Try playing listening and attention games. So for younger people attending your sessions, you can try games like Simon Says in your warm-up. It's really important to try and give enough time for the child to respond before repeating the instruction. We're often all in a rush, and we're all very keen to repeat instructions over and over again. And actually, we don't need to do that. We can giving them an additional 10 seconds, even 20 seconds is enough time for them just to actually process what you've said to them and give before repeating the instruction. Just one of the other additional needs that we need to address is developmental language disorder. So as I said, lots of young people have additional needs, and they think actually just language and communication needs makes up about 10% of children and young people who access education. And this could be a difficulty with any type of communication. So it's not necessarily that they will have limited speech or challenges with talking. It might be actually they really struggle with the listening part and the understanding what they've heard. Or it might be that they're really good at that part, the receptive part of communication, but really struggle with the speech part. Some young people just have developmental language disorder, or they can have it with another condition. But again, it would be very much a hidden disability. It might not go alongside anything else. There's 10% of people and young people in education have these additional needs. Okay, so really that was very much a whistle-stop tour of learning difficulties and learning disabilities, because I think for you guys, you probably don't need to know the ins and outs of every type of learning difficulty, every type of learning disability. You don't need to know all the acronyms or all the terminology. I think for you guys, and I know for myself when I was working in mainstream, it was more how I could see that somebody had a learning difficulty if it hadn't been told to me distinctly. So how would you know someone had a learning difficulty, and how might that present? So they might appear to be away with the fairies, disengaged, not necessarily looking at you when you're talking, finding the actual whole group teaching part of the session challenging. They might make really obvious mistakes, so things which you wouldn't you would be surprised at. So when you say get a green cone, they go off and get a red cone. When you are telling them to go left, and they don't. or you're asking them to lay things out, that might be a real struggle for them. They might fidget a lot, again, get very distracted. So when you are doing a whole group session, get really fidgety. And I put appearing to be forgetful, which I thought that some people might actually find a little bit offensive. But for a lot of our young people, they appear very forgetful. And actually, it's not that they've forgotten, it's that they don't know, they haven't quite processed what they've heard means, or haven't processed what they need to do with that information.
Laura, is it worth saying something about if they are fidgeting, you know, that can be good for them?
Absolutely. I think I might have a whole slide on it, Julie.
Okay, I'll shut up.
No, I might not though, so don't say that. So actually, one of the areas that I covered is, I did say that with dyslexia, they might have processing issues. So actually fidgeting is a really beneficial thing for our young people who might be have any sensory processing needs. So when you go into lots of mainstream schools and lots of special needs schools, you'll actually see that a lot of people have fidget bags so that they can sit while there's whole school talking with things to fidget with. So you might see twisty, turny things. There's these really, all the kids seem to have them, those pop-it things. They have those shapes with all the pop things. Those were actually originally fidget toys for young people with autism. And it is a really important part. And actually, they're being able to fidget supports them to listen and to process and to understand. So some good news. It doesn't make a difference which learning difficulty the young person's got. In terms of planning your sessions, the same strategies actually work for the vast majority of learning difficulties, whether that be, you know, a moderate learning difficulties or actually somebody with a learning disability like dyslexia. So reduced language. I just put it, less is more. When you're giving instructions, we avoid those kind of describing words, any unnecessary words. Just keep information short and sweet. As Julie said, just chunk it down. So instead of giving, if you've got 10 instructions to give, instead of giving all 10 at once, can you break them down into smaller segments? I think one of the things that I've noticed when I've worked with sports coaches in the past is that actually you guys are really good at doing that. You're really good at giving instructions, short amount of instructions, then building on those instructions. So you get someone to start a small activity, they go away, they practice it, and then they come back and you extend it and you keep doing that. And that's one of the great things that sports coaches I've worked with have done. So when you are giving the instructions for those activities, you keep the words minimal. And one of the things that I wrote is, it's hard sometimes, and it's absolutely fine if the first time you give instructions, there is lots of language in them and you're talking lots. Sometimes I stand teaching and I'm absolutely waffling on, and I have to kind of stop myself and think, right, actually, when I get to the end of this, I'm just going to give a shortened version, and then you can repeat those instructions with less language. And I think if you go into the majority of schools, you will see people make mistakes the first time and then repeat them, the instructions, with less language, and try and keep it really concise. And then just, it's kind of reiterating the same thing, just trying not to overload language. The more words our young people with any kind of additional needs hear, the harder they will find it to pick out those key words. So it's really key that we just try and focus on the key words.
And it's in a way, as you would speak to young children, or your children or grandchildren. The only difference is, so you use reduced language, but the language needs to be age appropriate.
Absolutely. I find myself, I've got a 2-year-old son, and I find myself talking to my son in the same way as I talk to some of my young people with additional needs. Okay, visual communication. Again, sport sessions are perfect for this. You've got your props to hand. So you've got your, right, this is going to be a test of my cricket knowledge, your wicket and your stumps stuff, maybe. Your wickets and your bat and your cricket balls, and if you're playing quick cricket, is that even still a thing? In the 90s it was very popular. You've got your bright blue wickets and you've got your bright orange ball. Your props are all there and are really visual. You naturally do lots of demonstrations. You are showing techniques. What I would say is about making sure you work your visual communication with your demonstration, with your verbal communication. So if you are giving a demonstration, you do the verbal kind of commentary either before or after, and do one demonstration with no language, because it could well be the language and the demonstration alongside each other, which poses some kind of challenge to a young person. And then gestures. In special schools and in mainstream schools, we spend half our life talking about using Makaton and Somerset total communication, which is another type of signing. And in reality, all those signing systems are gestures. They are just using your hands to make gestures. So if you're want them to go over somewhere, you're pointing at it. Makaton is just a system of sign language that has been devised from basically actions. The action words should link to Makaton. So use gestures, use your hands and your facial expressions. One of the things that I'm trying to teach sixth formers at the moment is that in a special school where we've drilled in teaching them sign language for a long time, is that actually beyond our special school environment, no one understands signing, so we need to use more gestures. Okay, allow time. Young people with learning difficulties just sometimes need a bit of additional processing time. When we hear things, the majority of us can instantly follow it. So if I said pick up a pen, most of us could just immediately pick up a pen. For our young people who need additional processing time, they've got to think, right, pick out the key words from that sentence. Right, so we've got pen. Then they've got to pick out the action word. And actually, it gets broken down in their head, and it does take a lot longer. For some young people in special schools, we can see from assessments that actually their processing time is around between 30 and 40 seconds. So a very simple instruction like look over somewhere, which it would take them 40 seconds. Look at something, it would take 40 seconds. For young people with dyslexia or dyspraxia, they need the additional time to start sequencing what you've told them in their head. So while you're giving that extra processing time, this is the hardest thing, I think. While you're giving that extra processing time, try not to repeat the instructions again. It's very easy to think, oh, they've not heard, or I need to say it again to help them understand. And actually, by saying it again, it starts the processing time back to the beginning, because they start listening to the new sentence. Also, if you do need to repeat instructions, try and keep it as similar in language as the first time that you've given that instruction. And then one good way of knowing whether they've had enough processing time is encouraging them to repeat the instructions back and demonstrate it to you. That will help help you be able to see that. Okay, so grouping, another kind of practical strategy. And it's really hard, isn't it? Because actually, when you are trying to split into groups, you naturally want to put those who are going to challenge each other and support each other to make progress in their skills into one group, and split them with the kind of higher ability and the middle ability and the lower ability. But actually, where there are opportunities, it's useful to actually use peer-on-peer coaching, which I'm sure you guys are excellent at, where you might have one of your higher ability, highly skilled young people in with your lower or middle kind of group to help them develop their skills, or to even set up and run that drill or activity that you're working on. And then when you have split up into groups, directing any adults who are in the group, perhaps just to go and support the groups that have got anybody with additional needs, to help make sure they're set up and they know exactly what they're doing. It might be that actually that adult is just repeating the instructions again. One of the other things that is a practical suggestion that I've learned from experience is, I think, when I used to have groups they were going in, you'd number them. So you just run along the line, kind of 1, 2, 3, 4. And I hope you can hear me, because
you froze.
I keep saying that I've got unsteady internet. Okay, so you go down the line and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and actually for young people with processing needs, just remembering what number you've said to them, acknowledging or even hearing it, is a real challenge. So if you can use some kind of visual to split people up, so as point direction they need to go, give them a bib with the colour cone they've got to go to. I think we've probably all seen it, where you've split everybody up into groups and people have either forgotten, don't know which group they're going into, or be going into a different group, and it seems like they're deliberately going to the wrong group. So making sure you've got strategies to make sure everyone knows where they're going. I nearly missed this one out. I've got regular and directed praise. So again, this is something that I've seen, I've worked with quite a few sports coaches. They are really good at. So using things like, instead of good boy or good girl or good sportsman, good throw, great hit, I liked the way you, or nice footwork, really directed praise, and actually starting it with their name as well, so they know exactly who you're talking to. So Josh, good throw. So it's clear that you're talking to that person and exactly.
Has everyone else lost Laura as well?
No, I've lost her.
Okie dokes, this one looks a little bit worse than times before. Well. Let's give her a second and hopefully she'll be able to come back in.
Don't you love a virtual training session when the IT lets you down?
Oh, good, you can't beat the internet, can you?
Whilst Laura is frozen, on average, how many young people that you think might have a learning difficulty do you work with? Are we talking, one in a group? Is it occasional, or is it often?
I say somewhere between one and 3
in a session.
In a session, yeah.
And is it just you leading that session, or do you have support?
It varies, but probably, or quite often myself, but there will be occasions where I've got somebody else, probably particularly a parent who's of one of those children will sometimes stay and help.
Thanks. I was just interested. Laura, you're back with us. I was just asking sort of how many young people that potentially had a learning difficulty or in sessions, and it sort of, you know, can be around 3, and whether they had additional support. But you're back with us, so I'll shut up. You're on mute.
I do apologise. This is what happens when you live in the middle of nowhere. So I am sorry. And we are very close to, you know, that is a great point. If we have got a group of 25 or however many people are in a group, and you've got 3 with learning difficulties or additional needs, that's a high level of support that you could require. Right, let me see if I can work out how to share my screen again. And get us back to it, because we were quite. I do apologise. Right. Okay, so I was just talking about the regular and directed praise. You know, for our young people who are in mainstream with moderate learning difficulties, I have genuinely seen the impact that sport can have on those young people, and especially inclusive sport. You know, I can remember 2 young men who I worked with probably about 5 or 6 years ago. Used to access one of the secondary schools' PE lessons, and they would come back beaming because they'd spent time with, well, to be honest, doing something quite normal, and had people to chat to, and it was their chance to shine. And to get that praise in that situation meant so much to them. The impact it had on their emotional well-being was phenomenal. They would go off to the secondary school just for this one session a week, and they would come back, and they'd been told they were good at things in an experience where they'd always been told they were kind of bottom of the class, or they needed to try harder, or they were disruptive. They'd been regularly told that they were good at things. And, you know, sometimes they were really good at getting the balls out for everyone. They were really good at collecting the balls up at the end. And the impact, you know, on our young people's emotional development and confidence of the impact of praise is huge. And I know that in one of the other sessions, you are looking at emotional development. So just thinking about what praise can do for that. Right. Oh, this bothers me. I seem to have changed fonts. That's a shame. Individual strategies, right. So you have got that young person who does need to fidget, who is disruptive. You know, I was trying to think of good names for these jobs. I failed. But can you give them jobs if they are disrupting the whole group while you are giving out the whole group teaching? You know, ball monitor. I was probably that disruptive child in netball lessons. I was always sent to collect the netballs in and put them in that big bag. So can you have a ball monitor? Can you have somebody, I'm going to test my cricket knowledge again, who goes to collect the wickets and the bats, put them away? Could they be setting up while you're giving the whole group direction, and then can you go in and focus in? Thank you for doing that job. Right, shall I tell you what you're doing now? You can work with this group. We're doing this. They can show you. Or if it's the end of the session, for our young people with learning difficulties, and they might find that the transitions at the end of the session are a real challenge. This is something they've enjoyed and it's finishing. can they have a job at the end when you're doing that final closing up for the session? Can they pack everything away? And actually, they might not be the best cricket player. They might not be going on to the shiny sights of, I don't know, Somerset Cricket Club. But could they be the best at packing away? Is that where you're going to be able to give them all that praise? Are they really good at that job? So just thinking about individual strategies, it also, if they are fidgeting and they're distracted during your whole group session, or they might be distracting others, which is where it gets really tricky. I think these jobs are really good. You see them in school, the amount of young classes who've got an envelope that needs delivering to reception, or a clipboard where the young person gets moving. So it gives them that extra sensory opportunity. So they get moving to do a job, and it's always packaged as a job, so they feel very helpful. Okay. So we're getting to the kind of questions point, but I wanted to just think about if you have got somebody where you can get some help or advice about specific young people. So a lot of our young people kind of over 11 in secondary school with moderate learning difficulties or dyspraxia, you can talk to them about it. They will be aware. They can tell you how they like to learn and what you can do to help them. At the end of the session, it might just be as much as, how was today? What went well? Were there any bits that we can repeat next week? Or are there any bits that, you know, we probably wouldn't do next week? Get their feedback and get them to think about what strategies would really help them. Talk to their parents or carers. And I'm not suggesting you spend hours talking to them. I know you'll have a lot of young people you engage with each day, but just a quick conversation. And I did put in, talk to the young person's teacher or SENCO. And a SENCO is the Special Educational Needs Coordinator at any school. All schools must have them. Because I can tell you now, I've worked in special needs education for 20 years. I have never had an external sports coach contact me to say that they have got one of my young people working with them, and I would be delighted. I would expect that every teacher I've ever worked with would be delighted to talk to you to help, and I would have thought 50% of them would come to one of your sessions to help if they possibly could, just as a one-off. They would be really wanting to make it work. Especially special school teachers. And then again, talk to the special schools. We're really open, we're always open for visitors, to support in any way we can, because for us, you know, I've had some positive experience with sports sessions, and then recently I've been trying to get one of my young people who's got Down syndrome into a sports club. He's exceptional at golf and exceptional at archery, but trying to find him a club that will let him join is impossible because he has got learning difficulties. So special schools will be really happy to support any way they can. And then go online. There are loads of podcasts now that will give you information. There's loads of information out there now.
We think what you're doing is incredibly valuable for supporting our community, and we work very hard at trying to help our young people access community activities. So we don't want them to just be surrounded by other people that have special educational needs. So what you're doing is extremely valuable and, you know, shouldn't be underestimated.
Absolutely.
Laura, can I ask a question on this slide? So I've got a young cricketer who I strongly suspect has got dyspraxia, but I'm not sure if her father recognises that. How do you get into that type of conversation so you can better support the child and the parents?
That's a really good question. So I would start off with kind of asking them to tell me a little bit about their young person and the things that help them to do well. rather than necessarily using any kind of label, just like what works when you're trying to do something. How can I help this young person to do well? Is there anything that you've noticed at home they struggle with? Also, would you mind if I spoke to their teacher? I don't know how old this young person is, but would you mind if I spoke to their teacher? Because actually your information could be really helpful for school as well as in your situation. And I appreciate you are all busy coaches and a lot of you are volunteers as well. So taking that additional time is a big ask. But, you know, talking to the parents without using any kind of labels. So just thinking, what can I do to support your young person? What would help them? Is there anything you've noticed that works really well for them? So making sure that you get their advice. And actually one of the things that I think, you know, as a teaching profession, we are developing is actually treating our parents as experts. They usually know a lot about their young people, even when they, you know, a lot of parents of young people with additional needs, and this is very, you know, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of them really struggle with their diagnoses. It's hard. You know, I think that talking to them without using any kind of labels would be really important. And
Steve, sorry, Laura, I'm cutting across you. Steve, can I ask, do the parents give positive feedback about how the young person experiences the cricket sessions?
Well, they enjoy coming and they're very positive about the experience, but I haven't sort of taken it to the next level of the conversation, which Laura's given me a few points. I mean, child Laura is 10 or 11 years old, but I suspect just by asking what works well with the parents, you'll start to unlock some of that. And the question, is it worth me speaking to the school, would immediately tell you whether they were in a special educational needs school or not, which would again start to unlock the problem, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, you will see a different side to a young person to how a teacher will see them, whether they're at special school or mainstream. And actually, if you're seeing things that raises some concerns to you, it's important you feed that back to the school as well, because it might be something they don't see in the school environment.
Yeah, hearing that you would respond so positively, if I am able to contact the school, I definitely will, because I think that would be a good experience for me as well as the school, by the sound of it.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
You would need parental permission.
Absolutely.
Oh, would you? Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you'd need to include that in any conversation. Is it worth me speaking to her school? Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Are you happy for me to talk to the school? And I would specifically check that. Yep. Are you happy for me to talk to the school? Who's the best person to talk to at the school?
Who's? Yeah. Yep.
Because that will also tell you a bit more information, because they might say the special educational needs coordinator, or they might say the class teacher.
Yeah, that would give you another clue straight away, wouldn't it? Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. So the next, Steve, you perfectly timed that, because the next slide is any questions. So if anybody's got any questions at all, I am here to help. Oh, great. I can see there's some in the chat. Sorry, so I have a hidden disability as well. So Julie was talking about that. I've actually got issues with my sight, so I can't look at the screen very well, which is why I've made a selection of very funny faces. That's why. Okay.
Can I just ask, I mean, on odd occasions, I mean, I've had one particular child who, you know, I sort of know now more, having done the Autism Society sort of training course on coaching with youngsters with that. We have had sort of occasions where that child's had an absolute meltdown, and then it's quite awkward to know how to sort of, I think, explain that to some of the other kids in the session, who just sort of look on and think, what on earth's going on here? Because they maybe have not experienced that in school or whatever. I don't know if you've got any suggestions with that. I sort of know I sort of need to try and keep everything sort of very quiet and calm, and sort of, you know, perhaps maybe take them to one side or whatever. But you've obviously got another group who are thinking, what on earth's going on here?
So, so I would have two approaches for this. So what I'd be thinking is, when he does have his kind of meltdowns, what's happening before, what's happening afterwards? Is there a specific point in the session that's happening? Is there anything I could be doing to actually, if it is at a specific point, could I do something differently before, or could I just, you know, give them one of those kind of jobs or take them away from the rest of the group at that point? In terms of supporting the rest of the group, I would have a conversation. I'm not sure how old's this young person?
Sorry, sorry, but at that time they were probably about 8. I think they're probably about 10 or 11 now, and I'm sort of I think because he's now, I think, at a special school, and also I think we've adjusted the way, you know, our coaches, I think, have adjusted the way that we deal with that. Everything's been much more on a level footing now for probably a season and a half, 2 seasons.
Yeah. So that's great that you've obviously worked out what works for that young person, and you've made a really personalised approach for him. So what I would do with the rest of the group, my suggestion would be to talk to them. They are going to come up with this, like they will have, it's highly likely that they will have had seen something at school or similar. You know, make sure that the young person and his mum's aware that you're going to have a chat with them, but kind of say, you know, he found it really tricky today, and we all manage things that are tricky differently. You know, for him, he responds like that, and he's working hard to find, you know, different ways to respond to things that are tricky. You know, I bet some of us get really cross when we're feeling tricky, and, you know, actually have that kind of conversation that's a two-way conversation with our young people, where you kind of, you know, what do you do when you find things tricky? Oh, he must have found that really hard, so that they understand that when he's having a meltdown or he is finding something is really bothering him, what, you know, why he's behaving like this. It's not an option, it's not a choice thing for him, he's not choosing to. And then actually talking to them about what they could do in that situation to help him. You know, he is finding it tricky. He doesn't want you to stare at him. If we can all kind of look at what's going on somewhere else, or if he's right next to you, just take, you know, you can ask him, are you okay? Can I help? Thinking about what they can do to respond to that, because actually that begins to give them a little bit of control back as well, which in a situation they might not understand will support them and their emotional needs as well.
Okay, thank you.
Laura, can you give a definition for ADHD, please?
Well, I was hoping that was ADHD, because I was thinking, what is ADHA? And I was about to say that as an acronym. I do not know. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's in the press a lot at the moment, because we're finding that a lot of people have been misdiagnosed in the past. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder can present as a young person who's very fidgety, very busy, may not be able to sequence their thoughts, may have a number of sensory issues, so may not like the feel of some materials, may not like loud sounds, or maybe really respond well to loud sounds, may are typically and traditionally are ADHD young people. So people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder would be someone who you would say was really busy. And historically, so over the last 10-15 years, we've got a lot better at diagnosing young people with those needs, so they are getting the support that they need. But previously they would often be our naughty children. However, we are, as a society, much better at supporting them now, so we don't quite see it in the same way. I think, is there a session on ADHD, Julie?
Yeah, there is.
I thought there was a whole session on that.
I think so, from memory. So the next session is on social, emotional and mental health.
Fabulous. Right. So I can see one in the chat. So we have a guy who regularly plays on our side. It's a message from, sorry, it's disappeared.
I can't see it.
Oh, it's from Stephen. So it says we've got a guy who regularly plays on our side with learning difficulties. He does well. He's so happy, but when he doesn't do well, he's very down. He also loves running club. And he's part of the group for enjoyment rather than necessarily coaching. Oh, great, and thank you, giving me some advice about where I can get them to go to play golf. So thank you, Stephen. So, again, that directed praise. So, when he doesn't do something so well, oh, it keeps disappearing, sorry. When he isn't doing something so well, our young people who have learning difficulties have had to get to the point where they're actually getting additional support within a school, have probably had quite a rough journey to get there, to be honest. They've probably been told they're not very good at things. They've probably been put into, they've probably got a support within the classroom who our teaching assistants who support them are fantastic, but it makes them different to young people. And a lot of our young people are very hypersensitive to any not doing well, and will ask lots of questions about it. So
Laura, there's another question. Young lad, attention deficit disorder, really good if you give him a job, but he often struggles with other youngsters. What can I do about it?
Right, okay. So
I'll have to be quick because we've run out of time.
Oh, I'm sorry, he's got ADD. Give him a job, and with struggles with other youngsters, what can I do about this? Try and maybe give him a buddy up, so somebody who has got really positive social skills to do the jobs with him and support them. So don't give him lots of people to work with all the time. Try and just buddy him up with one person and carefully select that other person so that he's not having to interact with lots of people. And just use it so that he has that interaction with one other person. Try and give him the same groups each week. I know which is tricky, or the same kind of couple of people within a group, so that he's not having to constantly learn new social skills. Whereas if he's got some people in that group who understand him and they work with him regularly, that will kind of get over that hurdle for him. And give him lots of jobs. I hope that's vaguely helpful.
Lovely. Thank you, Laura. A couple of things before we let you guys disappear. As Julie's already mentioned, the next workshop is going to be on the 7th of December, and that's social, emotional, and mental health in ADHD. So if you haven't signed up to that one yet, please do. And if you're not sure how to do that, email Steve Gass and he'll be able to help you. Steve is also going to send out an evaluation after this in the next few days. So please take a few minutes just to fill that one out. But thank you everyone for attending. Hopefully you found it brilliant and really useful, and we'll give you lots of ideas to go back into your environments with. But mainly thank you to Laura and Julie for giving up their time as well and sharing that with us. So thank you very much to you two and to everyone else as well.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And as Julie said, we really appreciate you taking this time today to support that. And again, if there's anything we can do in the future, do just get in touch, and I'm happy to be email questions or anything.
Yeah. What you do has real value to our learners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.